Hello, I'm Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. Today's a bit of a different video where usually we would talk about my team, my plans, my transfers and sort of discuss a few other selections. Today we're going to ignore my team completely and just talk about the assets and what type of teams you can build with those assets that I think are viable heading into IMOLA and beyond. I talked about this a bit in my transfer plans video, which I uploaded last week. You should go check that out. I talked about how IMOLA feels like Season 2 of the 2024 season of Fantasy Formula 1. It's like a new beginning almost. The entire beginning of the season was about figuring out where the teams are in relation to each other and working our way towards the first two sprint races of the season, which was China and Miami. Now, it's sort of gone back down again. We have a couple of races leading up into Austria, which is like the next season finale. And this is like the last time where I think you should experiment a bit with your team. You can go a bit differential here. And it's not just one team that's viable as it was last year where everyone was just running Red Bull, Aston, Red Bull, Aston, and whatever your last probably Shogun you, right? That was like the meta team that everyone had last year. This year's a bit different. There are multiple different routes you can take your team in, and they can have wildly different results at the end of the season. But since this is sort of a new beginning, I thought we would take a step back, not just focus on my team and my transfers, what I can do with my team, but rather what you should look to do with your team, as well as assessing what the assets look like and how good the assets seem to be right now. And the key point is right now. This is still being recorded the day before IMOLA practice starts, as you can see by the team log deadline. This is on Thursday. So I just still don't know how good the Ferrari upgrades are, how good the Red Bull upgrades are, anything like that. So all the information in this video will be before the information comes through from IMOLA. And what we learn in IMOLA might change my rankings between certain drivers. But the structures of the teams that I'm going to present to you right now will definitely still remain the same. It's just that which pick you want to go for might be different depending on the outcome of IMOLA. It also goes to say that you shouldn't rush to get any of these teams in by taking a bunch of hits. That's not the way you play this game. A minus 10 hit is almost never optimal. The one time I talked about before was like getting Max Verstappen in before a sprint race feels like a good point to take a minus 10 hit. Most people have been using their limitless now in Miami, so you will only be sitting with 2 transfers. If you still have your wild card, I wouldn't hate using my wild card here to get the team you want, so you have a strong showing. Especially if you're going for one of the budget building options, which I will get into. So just sit back and we'll start going through this right now. First team we're going to talk about today is, of course, the meta team. And if you haven't watched any of my videos before, you might be confused as to what this means. This name, sort of the team has been going around on Twitter quite a lot. And the meta team essentially refers to Max Verstappen plus Red Bull Racing plus Ferrari. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be Ferrari. If McLaren are way better and you have the money to stretch that, this can include McLaren as well. But essentially, it's Max Verstappen, which is the best driver, coupled with Red Bull Racing, which is the best constructor, plus another premium constructor. If Mercedes suddenly becomes super viable, then you could switch that to a Mercedes. But that's essentially what the meta team is. The meta team, however, is something that you cannot afford immediately. You couldn't afford this at the start of the season. So we've all had to build budgets to be able to reach it. And I, for one, who's been quite unlucky, I would say, with my budgets at the start of the season, I can't even afford this team yet. So this team is essentially Max Verstappen, 2 premium constructors, and then 4 of whichever drivers you can afford. The cheapest ones right now being the 2 Saubers and the 2 Williams. But if you can have just 0.1 extra, you can get a Hulkenberg instead of an Albon. And if you have even more, you can maybe even squeeze a Tsunoda in there. You could go for Hulkenberg over someone like a Sargent instead. And there are different constellations of this team, but that's the basis of it. Now, this is called the meta team because on paper it looks like the most viable team. The reason why this is the best team available is, for one, which is not even on the slide, but the Red Bull Racing asset, the constructor, is the best asset in the game right now, and it's very hard to go without it. Even if you're on a budget building type of team, it's very hard to skip it. For one, it gets the points of Max Verstappen and Checo, which is a lot usually, especially when they 1-2 every race. So you get the points for both Max and Checo. The second thing is that Red Bull Racing as a team are just so good at those pit stops. They've gotten fastest pit stop points in every race so far this season, and in some races, they've even swept the board, taking home all 18 points for fastest pit stop. And that's a lot, especially if you add that from every race throughout the season. So because of that reason, you almost need Red Bull Racing. And then you also always want a second premium constructor when going for the most points possible. The reason for this being that those constructors, especially Ferrari and now probably McLaren as well, also have a chance to get faster pit stop points, and you get the points for 2 premium drivers. So having something like 2 premium drivers and 1 premium constructor is always worse than 1 premium driver and 2 premium constructors, because you can only put the DRS boost on one of your drivers. So having something like a Max Verstappen plus a Checo is just strictly worse than having something like Max Verstappen, Checo, Ferrari is just strictly worse than having Max Verstappen, Ferrari, and Red Bull. All right. Now, the reason that this meta team is the best is because the DRS boost on Verstappen is by far the best. It's not even close. And I don't think I have to explain to you why. Max Verstappen just wins. He is the best driver right now in the best car. Yes, sometimes he won't win. Norris has won, Sainz has won. But apart from when he DNF'd, he has finished first, and then a second place. He is just so consistent compared to the other drivers that it's just safe to put the DRS boost on Max Verstappen. And bar DNFs on your budget drivers, on your C-tier drivers, you should score the most points every week. It is definitely the highest upside team. The negative with this team is that the team is pretty inflexible. Usually it will take up your entire budget, which means that if something happens, it's very hard to move around. Say you're sitting with the cheapest asset and suddenly Alpine come with a crazy upgrade. It's very hard to switch to Alpine. You pretty much have to sell Max Verstappen to something like a Perez, a Norris, a Leclerc, a Sainz, and switch the structure of the team. And at that point, you're not even running the meta team anymore. So it's very inflexible with your cheap asset because you're usually going for the cheap or best possible. So that's definitely a negative to this team. The other negative is that this team won't build as much budget as other popular teams. And if I've been using some terminology that we've used in the budget building aspect of the game, such as B and C tier assets. If you don't understand this, I would recommend you go and watch my budget building video where we discovered how the budget increasing algorithm works in F1 Fantasy, because I explain all the terminology there. But essentially, every asset who's above 25 million is called an A tier asset, and they will increase at a slower rate than B tier, who is down to 15 million, and C tier assets. So if you're running this team, because you're running Max Verstappen, you won't increase your budget as much as other teams might, which means that, yes, right now you might be getting the most points, but in a couple races time, when someone else might have caught up to you, increased their budget beyond yours, and can now afford this meta team but better budget options, they're just better than you for the rest of the season. And we're not even halfway through yet, and I actually think this is a bigger negative than many people talk about, especially if you're sitting on just the regular team, right? The Max Verstappen plus the 4 cheapest options. If, say, Albon, Sargent crashes in a race, you lose budget, they become cheaper. Those strategies that are not running this team, yes, you might have gotten a lot of points on Max Verstappen. He won the race, he got the fastest lap, he ended on like 48 points. That's great for you, you got that. But then 1 or 2 of your cheapest drivers DNF'd, and then someone else who might have not gotten as much points with Max Verstappen, who might have been sitting there with a Sainz, a Leclerc, and are not sitting with a Logan Sargent, they suddenly gain both a lot of budget on you and also gain points on you because they didn't have those bad drivers that DNF'd, right? So what can happen is in just a few races time, when your cheap assets has decreased in price and their cheap assets such as Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Stroll, those better C tier options, when they've increased in price and then they sell, they can get to this team and a better version. And I've called this the Meta Team Plus, the Meta Plus team. So the minimum budget to just upgrade from the regular Meta team to something better is 109.2. That will give you Nico Hulkenberg over Albon. If you want to get Tsunoda over Albon, you need 110.5, and I think Tsunoda is probably the best option right now in that C tier category. But anything there in between, if you're on like 111, 112, you can build a pretty good Meta Plus team. And in those cases, I do think this is the best team to go for. And if you're on something completely different, if you've been on a budget building route, I might even consider using my wildcard if you this week are sitting on like 112, 113 million and can build a team such as Max Verstappen, Nico Hulkenberg, and Tsunoda, Bottas, and maybe a show, and then, you know, obviously the Ferrari and the Red Bull asset. So I would consider going to the Meta team, but only if you can afford some variant of the Meta Plus team. If you can only sit there with the 4 weakest drivers, I would not consider this team currently. So then we move over to the balanced team, and this is the team that I think most people are going to be running moving forward. This is a team that consists of one of 4 DRS boosted drivers, either Norris, Checo, Leclerc, or Sainz. You still have your Red Bull Racing and Ferrari. This can be McLaren if you want, and if McLaren ends up being super good in Imola. Again, this is recorded before Imola. And the point of building a balanced team is that this money you save from going without Verstappen is then spent on your cheaper drivers to upgrade them to Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, and then any of the options that you see here next to me. I know Ocon isn't there, but I couldn't fit him, and I also don't think he's that good. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The upsides to this balanced team is that it's a very affordable team. Someone who's lower than 109.1 million can afford this team, so you can pretty easily get to it. This team is also quite flexible, and what I mean by that is that if it turns out that something like an Alpine, something like a V-Carb comes with a big upgrade and suddenly you need to switch over to them because they're performing much better than the other C-tier assets, you can get to that quite easily. It's quite easy to swap between different assets because they're all in the same sort of price category. This also goes for your B-tier assets. If you have Norris and it turns out this Ferrari upgrade is amazing, you just quickly switch to Leclerc, and yes, you've only really lost some points in that one race. This team is also much better for budget building because it doesn't run Max Verstappen. These B-tier assets increase faster, and also the C-tier assets that you can afford thanks to running one of the B-tier assets instead of Max Verstappen is that are just much better than those cheapest C-tier assets. So, and it's not just for budget. I mean, Tsunoda and Hulkenberg pretty much get the most points every week now. Magnussen has also been up there, although we didn't really do that in Miami. But you also have this the biggest upside C-tier drivers that can really pop off. I mean, Tsunoda got like 20 or so points. That's a lot of points for a C-tier driver. And when you can hit those kinds of score with your C-tier driver, it doesn't matter if Max Verstappen runs away with the points in first. If you just pick the correct B-tier driver who gets second or third most points, you can usually catch up to the Max Verstappen player both in budget and in points thanks to your better C-tier assets. Now the problem is what I just mentioned. You need to get the right B-tier driver to put the DRS boost on. And who knows? I mean, if you are going with... Since there's so many people running this sort of team, if you're running Sainz and then Sainz DNFs, you fall back a lot, right? If you pick the wrong one by a big margin, such as a DNF, you're very vulnerable to your rank. You're going to see a big rank drop. You would always see a big rank drop when your DNF boosted driver DNFs, but with Max Verstappen, there's not that many people running it, so I feel like you can sort of catch up, but picking the correct driver here is so crucial, and it's quite unpredictable. Right now, I don't know which of these 4 would be the best. It's looking like Ferrari might be good with the upgrade. Norris is probably the best one right now, especially since he tends to get those driver of the days quite often. So that's definitely a negative to this team. And the other obvious negative is that you don't have Max Verstappen. Even if you get the correct B-tier driver, you might not get the most points if/when Verstappen wins. And I've drawn an evil face on Max Verstappen because he truly is the Grinch that ruined Formula 1. So out of all the drivers that you can fit into your balanced team, which do I prefer? So out of the B-tier drivers, I would currently probably say Charles Leclerc. It's looking like Ferrari is going to be strong. The Ferrari upgrade looks pretty big. And because he's so much cheaper than Norris, just getting that extra upgrade from the C-tier drivers, I feel like edges Leclerc over Norris. But if it turns out that Norris is just way, way faster, it's Norris. Norris is second on my list currently. Perez is it feels also very reliable, but he can also just turn up with a stinker as he did last year. So I still don't fully trust Perez, even though he's been solid this season. For that reason, he is in third. But again, if the Red Bull upgrade turns out that, if the Red Bull upgrade puts Red Bull another, 30 seconds ahead and Perez is second by a clear margin, as he was at the beginning of the season, then he would obviously be the best. And it feels mean to put Sainz that low because Sainz is a great option as well, and it truly shows how even these drivers are right now. I just prefer Leclerc over him, even though Sainz is cheaper, but the difference in price is not that big, so I feel like you can just afford Leclerc anyway. But between Leclerc and Sainz, there's almost nothing between them, really. So it's really hard to call. These four drivers are so close. It could be a big difference between them if one of them DNFs or if one of them just runs away with it. But I would say hedging your bets on a Ferrari asset is probably the safest, because if you have Leclerc or Sainz, I do think they're going to be pretty close in points. And if Sainz is the best scorer and you have Leclerc, and say Sainz gets second and the driver of the day and Leclerc gets third, you're at least closer to the other Ferrari assets, to the other people owning the other Ferrari asset. Whereas if something like Perez were to DNF or Norris were to DNF, I feel like you lose more, if that makes sense. I don't know. I just feel like Ferrari is the safest pick right now, and I feel like most people are already sitting with Ferrari assets. So it's very close. It's going to be easier to tell or easier to make a decision regarding this after Imola. As for the C-tier drivers, I think by far the best right now are Tsunoda and Hülkenberg. For their price, I don't think you can beat them. Tsunoda just looks unstoppable. He seems to get high up, especially now heading into Imola and Monaco, where there aren't that many overtakes or positions gained. Having someone that can start in 7th from just a good qualifying is so valuable. And I do really feel like Tsunoda can show how good he is in these two races. Hülkenberg as well also just gets into those positions where he can score a lot of points. Since you can't really rely on overtakes and positions gained, if these two were to qualify in like 11th or 12th and then just stay there for these two races, they could see a drop in price and just like a 0-point haul. That is the risk you run. So it's definitely risky, but they definitely have the biggest upside. Then moving on to sort of the budget builders and the worst Tsunoda. I don't want to call Daniel Ricciardo the worst Tsunoda, but we saw him put it on P4 in qualifying in Miami. And if he does that at Monaco or in Imola, I feel like he could end on one of those point scoring positions and again get a lot of points, as well as increasing in budget. So I feel like Ricciardo is really good, especially for these two races. And, when he has not been P4, he's been like P18. So I feel like he's not as even as Tsunoda is. He has his highs, but he also has his lows. And when he has his lows, if he starts from P19, he might take a risk, start from the pit lane, start P20, and then after 3 or 4 DNFs, he's at least moved up 4 positions and will increase in price. So I definitely don't hate Daniel Ricciardo. The best sort of wild cards are definitely Magnussen and Stroll. Stroll is the most expensive, and I might look to sell Stroll this week, but that's only because I need to free up budget somehow. But Stroll and Magnussen are really, really good because the cars they have are just better at driving. They get a lot of overtakes. Now, they probably won't get that in the coming 2 races, but I still think there are just a snippet above the rest of the C-tier assets. Then we have Pierre Gasly. The Alpine upgrades seem to work. They're getting quite a lot of overtakes. Again, how good is that going to be in the coming 2 races? I don't know. That's why he's a bit lower right now. But I do think he could be a really, really good option and a decent differential after Monaco. As for the Sauber assets, they're cheap, right? That's why they're there. They usually start pretty far back, can move up maybe if there's some DNFs in front. Those wheel nuts, though, hurt them. Hopefully they have them fixed now for Imola. Williams stink. Williams really do stink. I feel like Logan Sargent, you only pick him if you can't afford anything else and you need budget for the other drivers. I don't think there's any reason to run Alex Albon over Shogun Yu, Hulkenberg, or Bottas, who are all in the same category of price right now. I just don't see the reason why you would do that. At least not until Williams come with upgrades. And Esteban Ocon is in the same position. He's sort of the same as Gasly. It's just that he's so much more expensive. I think he's like 1.5 million more expensive than Gasly. And for his price, you can get a Tsunoda or a Ricciardo. And they're just such better option, and you can almost stretch to a Stroll. So that would be my current tier list for the C-tier drivers. Let me know if you disagree with any of them, but that's how I would assess them right now. All right, hear me out. I know this seems crazy, but I do think there is a third viable team that you could run. Yes, it says crazy up there for a reason. This is crazy. You can decide to go for no A-tier assets, which means going without Red Bull Racing. It's very risky, but it just might work, and here's why. What this team is all-out budget building. You do this by picking something like a Ferrari, and then you pick one of the 3 current C-tier constructor assets just to have them increase in price. The reason why I have these 3 here is because these 3 are the ones that I feel like are just safe, right? Haas, VCarb, and Aston Martin, unless DNFs happen, will increase in price every single race. And sometimes by a lot if they have decent races. They definitely have the possibility of hitting that 1 million increase instead of the 0.5 increase. Right now, I think Haas might be the best. VCarb is close. Aston is also good, but Aston is at 14.5, so you can only really do Aston for one race, and that's for Imola, so you need to use a lot of transfers to get there. And the reason you do this is because you go without Red Bull now and try and build budget. You try and save a bit of the points you lose by going two out of the good B-tier assets, and then you pick the best 3 out of the C-tier assets. Caution, and this is the big one. I would only attempt this if you're already far ahead in budget. What's far ahead? I would say above 13 million. If you're around 14, 15 million, I feel like you're quite far ahead of the curve when it comes to budget. And in your case, I would consider using the wildcard to get a team like this up until Austria. Now, in Austria, you obviously cannot run a team like this because in a sprint race, I feel like you need to have Max Verstappen. So, up until Max Verstappen, if you want to go with this crazy team, it's very out there, it's very differential, not a lot of people are going to run this, which is why it might work. If you're ahead on budget, you go full on budget maniac right now. So that for Austria, you can then afford a good Max Verstappen plus meta team. And you plan your transfer so that you can get to that in time. And then if this goes correctly, right now the budget for an insane team is like 121 million, I believe. 121 point something. And by Austria, it would probably be at like 125 million. And this team that I'm talking about is a team of 2 premium constructors and 2 premium drivers, including Max Verstappen. This is a Max Verstappen meta team with like a Carlos Sainz added to it. And if you get to that, you have 6 months of the season where you're gonna be one premium, or it's not 6 months, but 50% of the season you're gonna have one extra premium asset every weekend compared to all the other drivers who are just running the Max Verstappen team or the balanced team, right? So if you can get to that, it is incredibly powerful. And even if you don't hit like a Max Verstappen plus something, you can still run like the balanced team, but with 2 of the premium drivers. It's a crazy thing to reach for, but I do think this is how you can like actually win Formula 1 fantasy. This strategy has the highest upside in terms of budget building, but also the highest upside. It couldn't go completely wrong. You can ruin your entire season, but if you want to win, I think you might want to go for this. You're going to fall behind on points a bit because you're not going to have Red Bull Racing. You just need to hope that your C-tier asset on the constructor side ticks along, your Haas or your V-Carb. The reason why it's Haas and V-Carb is because Hulkenberg and then Tsunoda or Ricciardo tend to reach that Q3, which means they get that little bit of extra points from Q3, which is often enough, unless of course DNFs, but sometimes even with a DNF, for the constructor to rise in price. So that's why you go for those two. Aston Martin is only good until it reaches 15 million. When Aston Martin reaches 15 million, it's one of the worst assets in the game. Don't buy it. But right now, you could go for it. A lot of negatives to this, of course. Very unpredictable DRS boost still. And even if you get the correct B2 driver, you might not get the most points if/when Verstappen wins. That's the same. And you're also going to get less points every weekend because you don't have Red Bull. That's just a fact. You're going to get less points every weekend. But again, it's very differential. Not a lot of people will be going for it at the top. And if you can hit that budget target, this is why that's strong. Now, you might be thinking, what? But if I'm on 110 million, why can I do this? Why can I not go for this, right? And the reason is you're already so far away from reaching this god tier team, right? That the risk is not worth it, because the odds of you actually hitting, the odds of you actually reaching that team when you're already far behind, such as like me, if you're on 108 million, yes, you can catch up on budget, but at our cost cap, I think you're just better off going for the most points and hope that the people who go for this fail or aren't in your mini leagues. So if you're far away in terms of budget, I wouldn't bother with this, just because you need to build budget for so long. You're not going to reach that 125 million anytime soon, unless you're extremely, extremely lucky. And because of that, when you reach the team, when you reach the 125 million, so you can go for that god tier team, it's going to be like Monza. And at that point, there's not that many races remaining in the season, so you're not going to have time to regain the points, get back the advantage, or use the advantage of the bigger budget to catch up in points, because at the end of the season, points matter, not how much cost cap you have. So it's a very risky strategy, but I just think it can work. It's definitely the most crazy and wacky strategy out there. But if you're really far ahead on budget and you have your wild card, I would be tempted to go for it just to play differently. I would personally love to play a team like this. I unfortunately just cannot with the budget that I currently have. So that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button. Please click subscribe. I'm going to be continuing these types of videos all the way through this season, trying to get as high of an overall rank as possible. If you have any questions regarding your team and what you should do, leave them in the comments. I'm usually pretty good at responding to the comments within the first 2 days of the video releasing. So leave your questions in the comment and I'll see if I can get to them. And I would also like to plug my Twitter real quick. On Twitter is where I post my final team selection before the deadline every week. I also tweet about a bunch of random stuff there. So if you want to catch my team updates, my personal team updates, it's best to do that there. And look forward to my team selection video coming out tomorrow, or perhaps on Saturday morning. We'll see the time frame a bit, where I go through what my actual transfers will be like for the IMOLA Grand Prix after I've seen some of the practice sessions. So if you want to catch that, click subscribe. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.